By accident, going through YouTube, I stumbled upon the Grammy performance of Sam Smith. Grammys I haven't watched in years, don't recognize any of the artists. And he had a performance which evoked a lot of different energies. I'll get back to that later. Um, what I was going to start with was the wonderful theme of ASMR, auto sensory meridian response, which I'm not actually going to talk much about ASMR itself, but more as a metaphor. Not even as a metaphor, actually, as a useful technique. So ASMR, if you look up on YouTube, if you don't already know, is a technique of stimulating energy using various sensory cues. It's pretty interesting in a way because there's lots of different cues. Some people don't respond to any of them. Some people respond to some of them. So the most common one, I guess, is whispering. So you'll get videos of people whispering things, and some people find that very sort of, it's almost like hypnotic, or is sort of you feel like a sort of energy vibe from it. Uh, some people do things where they move their hands, and the movement of the hands creates energy. I've seen a few of them where there's like people they pluck energy from your system, kind of a thing, and it's a completely imaginary thing. Um, I guess one of the most famous ones is gentle whispering, and she does a lot of different cues. So there's like a whole bunch of people, and people tend to experiment with this a lot to see what works. So it's kind of like a wide open gamut. And so what seems to actually be happening is the the sensory response is occurring in the various senses, right? So that's why whispering might work, because it affects the sound. It changes the sound vibration. Some people respond to visual things, right? Some people respond to like touching events, or also things like just like attitudes. Attitudes can be very stimulating. So like you'll have people acting very nice and like very caring, and that has like an effect. Even though it's on a video, people can zone into that vibrational effect. Of course, this is widely mocked and disputed as ridiculous. But I mean, millions of viewers can't be wrong. There's like thousands of channels probably with millions and millions of viewers. So obviously it has some kind of effect. Um, but I'm not really going to be talking about ASMR as such. It's more interesting as an energy technique. And this is something like I've spoken quite a bit about the book New Energy Ways by Robert Bruce. And in New Energy Ways, he discusses some techniques, which in many ways are kind of like ASMR. Um, and actually, I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this, is kind of like the ASMR technique is a great way of learning about energy. So one of the first lessons, which, or one, not first tests, one of the first tests I give people with energy is to imagine like an energy ball going up and down their hand. I've done this like 1,000 times in this channel, right? And you imagine the energy ball, right? First of all, what you do is you scratch your hand so you can feel like a physical thing, and then you imagine it. And then there's like a space between the physical touch and then the imaginary touch, right? And some people can cross that boundary pretty easily. Some people can't feel it at all. I saw another one recently. I got to find where that was again. I found somebody else describing another example recently about how to do it, which was really cool. I've forgotten completely what it was, so I'll try and track that down again so I can give the other example. But in a lot of ways, imagining energy going up and down your hand, it's like auto ASMR. It's like doing ASMR to yourself. It's doing ASMR to yourself. So in the same way, if you get a response from watching an ASMR video, I would say you're probably pretty open energetically to be able to meditate into the energy space, right? Which is pretty important. Now, I've more than hinted about this in the past. I think I did it in my last video where I was talking about. Well, I started doing this in the sensual space. So the difference between the difference between like just touching something or touching something in a sensual way. There's a very distinct difference between those two different sensory outputs, and that kind of corresponds to the difference in intention. Could also be associated with like an ASMR kind of vibe, you know. It's it's got a sort of an energetic intention behind it. So this is something we project onto other people all the time. If you're in a romantic relationship, or if you're with your kids or whatever, you know, you'll have different forms of touch and caring, different actions you do to project emotions, right? So my kids came here last night, and I'll like make pizza or something, right? So it's an action which involves my energy and provokes a feeling in the kids. Oh, we're being cared for, kind of a thing, right? Which is obvious. What's not obvious is when you become aware of this in the energetic space itself. Now, I think typically people are looking at ASMR more or less as consumers, right? So they're not really doing it in a meditative way. They're just like, oh wow, this feels kind of weird, right? Like there was, this was years ago. I listened to ASMR years ago before I got into the whole ayahuasca thing. Excuse me. And I used to take these long bus rides up to Santiago. It was like 2 hours there and back. So after like lecturing all day, I'd get on the bus and just put on some ASMR and just vibe out, you know? And it was like totally relaxing. But even then, I was just a consumer. I didn't really have a meditative intuition about what that might do. So one of the things that Robert Bruce talks about in his book, it used to be called New Energy Ways. It's actually called Energy Work now, right? You can find it free online if you do a little search. It's basically an introduction to energy work. It's a very, very good introduction. And it starts off with a simple thing like imagining a ball of energy going up and down your hand. And then over the course of about 100 pages, it advances into sort of pretty advanced techniques, including creating energy tools. But one of the most interesting things is before he gets to the energy tools, he has some sort of interesting techniques he discusses about moving energy. So once you can pretend that there's energy in your hand and actually feel it in that sort of ASMR-ish kind of way, it's just pretense. You're not trying to change the world. It's just like having this good feeling and moving it around. But once you can feel that, then you can start moving this feeling around your body. And then what's interesting about it is he's actually got a few simple techniques he uses. And so one of the techniques he uses to move energy is obviously you can move energy and you can just imagine a ball of light moving up and down your legs and your arms and your feet. And if you feel energy, that feels really, really good. But then he's got other techniques, and some of these techniques, I was like, what? I was like, I didn't really understand it. But like one of the first ones was a sponging technique. And so you imagine like you get like a big sponge from a bath, and then you're moving the sponge up and down your legs and your body. And I was like, what is he talking about using a sponge? But of course, a sponge can be like a very sort of sensual object, not a sexy object, like a sensual object, like just in the sense that you're actually stimulating the senses, right? And there's a whole bunch of ways you can use a sponge, right? You can use it like as well, I'm generally using it for cleansing, right? But you might also use it for squeezing, right? Squeezing and letting water come out of it. And so there's a bunch of sort of dynamic qualities in what a sponge might be. Now, if you look at ASMR videos online, it's not uncommon for people to play with lots of different objects, including sponges and loofahs and various other things. Often, what they'll do is they'll have like a stereo microphone, and then they'll rub like a sponge or some other object in one side, and then on the other side, and they move back and forth in the stereo field. And what's interesting about it, they like oftentimes what they'll do is they'll make a sound and then they'll pause. So they're playing with the sound and the silence. So there's a kind of like implicit meditative aspect of what ASMR is doing, right? There's a sort of it's like the sound and the silence, and so what happens? There's like a contemplation, even if it's implicit and unconscious. There's a contemplation of what the difference is, right? Which can be very relaxing. I think most people just find it relaxing. Um, and then also, like I said, some people might respond to the auditory quality of it, the sound. Some people might respond to the physical. So they might like the idea of like squeezing the water out and releasing, squeezing and releasing. And you've seen videos like this before. There's a whole bunch of these sort of meme videos about satisfying videos, and there'll be like people slicing a cake. Oh wow, that's really satisfying. Or blowing up a balloon. Oh, it's really satisfying. There's tons of videos, meme videos, satisfying videos, right? They're sort of visually or auditorily satisfying. And that's just a sort of ASMR thing. But what it's really dealing with is the underlying energy structures of elemental consciousness. And I say elemental specifically because you can relate the elements to the senses, right? And so there's that aspect of it where there's kind of like, even though we don't realize it, we're actually playing with the fine grain, ethereal nature of consciousness. But we just think, oh, it just feels good. But there's a reason it feels good. The reason it feels good is because consciousness has a specific, there's like an ethereality, or not, that's the wrong word. I don't want to say texture, but let me just say texture. Consciousness has specific textures which manifest in each aspect. So it can the texture of consciousness can manifest in the auditory quality, in the visual, in the touch, in the taste, in the scent quality, right? I was listening to some guy talking about a perfume the other day, and he was talking about the texture of the perfume. The smell had a specific texture to it. So it's not something we might normally think of, but people who are in the know will talk about this stuff. Or like wine experts will often talk about the texture, or they'll talk, the smell, obviously, the look. There's like, what it is, it's people, they're trying to hone in. It's almost a meditative aspect of honing into the energetic structure. They think they're talking about the structure of an object, right? Because we're sort of programmed to believe that what we're actually describing is an external object, but what we're really describing is an implicit texture of consciousness. And so that's one of the things that ASMR people do, is they do these sometimes extended videos exploring the qualities of various sensory inputs. So while the ASMR artist Gentle Whispering, she's got one where it's like a suit fitting. So it's like she's pretending that she's like designing a suit, and it's very careful and slow and thoughtful and caring. And it's got all these, so she's actually playing with lots of different sensory aspects of it. And this is kind of what Robert Bruce suggests doing in energy work, is that when you're working with the sponge, it's not just a visualization, but you can also, like, the more you can experience the other sensory aspects of the sponge, it's an imaginary sponge. You could use a real sponge at first, but the real thing is to try and connect with the imaginary aspect of it. And the reason why the imaginary is interesting is because once you can have a sensory response from the imaginary, then you've actually bypassed the physical object, right? And you've moved into an imaginary object, which is creating a physical response. Or you might call that, well, it starts off as an imaginary object, but as you become more tuned into what is happening, your awareness of this will move into the astral plane, and it becomes an astral perception, right? And that's when things become very interesting, because unlike the physical plane, the astral plane is unlimited, right? It is complete, unlimited, no friction. No friction. He's got another one he does with he's got a combing action he does, like a combing. So that's also another one which they often use in ASMR is combing. And so he does one where you're sort of combing energy down the body. You might comb the energy. And so there's really no limit to this. So this is one of the things that people will talk about is obviously like there's this sort of weird sort of bifurcation between different perceptions of consciousness. So you see a lot of non-dual people poo-pooing, for lack of a better word, this kind of energy work. I was watching a criticism of Muji the other day, and some woman got up during one of the satsangs and was saying, Muji, I'm going through this Kundalini awakening and going through all, and he's like, oh, that's child's play. He just blew it off, and that's a sign, I guess. So what I'm pointing to here is that there's two different kinds of. Everybody wants to believe they're enlightened, but there's two different openings to that, and one of them is through Shiva, and one of them is through Shakti. And so people who claim to be enlightened typically have gone through the Shiva awakening, which is the non-dual crown. People call it the crown opening, but it's kind of like the heart opening. But so there's that aspect of it. I think a lot of non-dual people it's the crown which opens, and then there's other people who have the Kundalini, and typically I think most people don't have the full Kundalini awakening, so it'll be a root awakening, and that will awaken awareness of energy. So on the one side, you get people who've got this sort of they get this awareness of spaciousness, and then there's other people who have this awareness of energy, and so there seems to be a conflict, but those two forces meet during the heart opening, right, and then it all sort of makes sense as it like connects. But at the moment, I'm talking about energy, right? I'm talking about the energy opening, but I'm not unaware that. Hello. This is the cat who came into my house 6 months ago. It was a kitten. I don't know how it found its way out into the middle of the countryside, but it came right into my bedroom, so he made it there. So he got to live. Anyway. I'm not unaware of the Shiva aspect of this. I'm just focusing on the energy aspect. So the combing of energy and the movement of the perception of the sensory into the astral plane, essentially. Let's just call it the imaginative plane, because it's less esoteric. Right? Everybody understands an imagination, right? As soon as you say astral, it's like, I can't do that, right? Let's just call it imaginary. Because what happens is as you work with imagination, is it turns into the astral. Because it already is the astral, it's just a matter of perception. You don't realize that that's what you're working with at first. And that's an important point as to the title of this video. You don't realize what you're working with at first, right? You don't realize. It seems like it's just imagination, right? You don't realize you're evoking something. You don't realize you're evoking an energy. Because it just feels good. It's just some imaginary thing. We're just playing, right? We're just playing. That doesn't mean anything. Supposedly. Yeah. What it is, it's the I had a bunch of titles for this video. One of them was ASMR. I don't remember what I called this video, but one of them was ASMR and the Misapprehension of Evil. That was one of the titles. And then I saw that stupid Sam Smith video, you know. But actually, not a stupid video. It's certainly the misapprehension of something, though. And it's certainly the misapprehension of consciousness and the seduction of extinction. That's what it is. The seduction of extinction. You see, consciousness is seductive. By its nature, it's completely and utterly seductive. The Shakti aspect of it. Shakti, dude, Shakti is inherently seductive. Everything. I'm sitting out here in the countryside here, surrounded by green pastures, if you will, right? Almond trees down here, orange trees up there, and I don't think we're flowering or anything at the moment right now, but when the flowers are out, especially in the almond trees or in the orange trees, and you're walking through the estate, you become really aware of like the action going on in the flowers. There's trillions of bees, lots of other insects, birds. I mean, there's the whole natural ecosystem at work. It's the seduction of the natural world, right? Those flowers, their smells are like an ASMR signal to the natural world to come and partake in the cup of nectar, which they offer to the birds and the bees. The birds and the bees, which we discuss amazingly in the human world as a metaphor for sexuality, right? The seduction of the natural world, which is manifested through the proliferation of sensory objects, smells, touches, glances, sounds, tastes, right? Maybe this is really esoteric. It doesn't seem esoteric to me. I don't know. It seems like really normal to me. But like maybe there's an esoteric aspect to this. So I guess I'll try and skip ahead here. Like, so I guess the main thing here is this sensory quality of energy. On the one hand, it's fascinating because if you can connect with any vibe from any ASMR video, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to connect with the imagination of some kind of feeling. So the one I usually do is scratching your hand and feeling the energy, and then imagining scratching your hand and feel the imaginary energy, right? So that's one way of doing it. But there's probably 1,000 different ways of experiencing this, because you could imagine any kind of thing. That's a touch sensation. Maybe you can imagine what it's like walking into your mother's kitchen, and what smell might you smell? It might be like tomato sauce or something. Or my mother's always got like bread baking or something like that, right? Maybe you can imagine the sight of getting out of an airplane in a tropical place, and then the feeling of like relaxation, right? So there's all these imaginary situations which might cause sort of shift in your energy. Well, I guess a lot of the NLP people like Tony Robbins have been talking about this for years, about, you have to change, you have to shift your energy by taking control of what your mind's thinking about, right? So the Robert Bruce book, Energy Work, has got lots of different techniques. So he goes into the sponging, combing the energy. He's got a bunch of other techniques too, which I've forgotten. Circle it, you cycle energy, you move energy. And then he's got some really sort of interesting techniques. He's kind of a Johnny come lately, I think, to the elemental work. Well, he does discuss it effectively. He's actually got some really cool ideas on using the elements. So, for example, when he gets into working with tools, so like a tool might be a comb, like combing energy, right? And like if that seems silly, just watch somebody. There's a lot of like ASMR thing about combing your hair or going to the hairdresser, and so watch one of those and see like if they're combing it. Do you have any kind of feeling with that? Right? That might have some kind of vibe to it, and that's a good way of seeing. Well, of at least sort of apprehending that maybe that is an interesting way of connecting with energy, right? Because that's what it is. ASMR, auto sensory meridian response. Meridian means energy work, right? So that's what it is. ASMR is energy work for the public, and there's millions of viewers of it. So lots of people are switched onto this, even though they don't know what they're apprehending is the fine texture of consciousness. So he's got a lot of different tools he creates too. I think at one point he's got a tool, like he's imagining he's got like a spray bottle, like you might have a hairdresser, like and so what he imagines is he's got a spray bottle filled with water, and he might spray that on your body to do a cleansing, or he might spray it on your chakras to cleanse the chakras, which seems silly at first. You're like, dude, that just is like imaginary. And so at first that might seem imaginary, but what happens is once you connect to energy, and once you start sort of contemplating it, like for example, maybe you just pretend you're like moving a sponge up and down your hand, and once you start apprehending, not apprehend, what's the word? Once you start feeling that, and then sort of contemplating it, and once it starts moving into the sort of astral, it becomes a sort of more solidified, imaginative object. Then it becomes very easy to imagine a tool. And so you might think of a tool like a spray bottle. Okay, it's something that cleans things, right? So that's interesting. But then one of the things you could do is, what kind of liquid are you using? Are you using water? Are you using bleach? Are you using some kind of divine potion? Are you using an LSD tincture? I mean, what are you actually spraying? And what's interesting about this is, as you spray this in the imaginative plane, the tool has the effect which you're imagining. And sometimes that effect, it actually radiates out into deep imaginative structures. And now this is interesting because obviously one of the things people talk about, like when they're talking about things like manifestation, is like, well, you got to believe to achieve, or you got to imagine it first, right? You have to believe you've already got it, right? Then you believe it and it happens, right? So the same thing can happen with these imaginative tools. Of course, if you're just imagining it, like I don't suggest you just imagine it like in common imagination. I mean, you can do it, but it probably won't have much effect until you actually make the sort of energy connection. And once you start vibing with that, because what you really want to do is, like for example, if you're watching an ASMR video and somebody's doing a combing and you can actually, you actually sort of feel a vibe, then the thing to do with that is actually just turn off the video and just try imagining that same vibe if you were doing the combing yourself, or if it's a touch or a look or whatever it might be. And it's like, how do you, this is what I would call the cultivation of energy, right? This is cultivation of energy. Now, what's interesting about this is there's lots of different styles. So some people respond to touch stimulus, then some people respond to like caring, loving kindness in the videos. And so that's something you can do too. So for example, one thing to watch, if you were to make some sort of like spray tool where you're spraying like a liquid into your chakras, you could say, well, wait a minute, this is a liquid which is infused with what? Well, it could be a warm liquid. So that would combine the water element with, it's a steaming liquid. It's a steam cleansing, right? That Robert Bruce discusses in his book, actually. So there's like a combination of the elements on that level. Or you could infuse it with an emotion, like it's a steam cleansing which is infused with love. So you can, what's interesting about this is there's a lot of structures of objects. In reality, objects tend to have pre-established structures. But on the astral plane, you can sort of create the structures you choose to create. So you could, for example, create a liquid which was infused with loving kindness and also cleanse things in your system. And so you could, in your chakra system or whatever. Now, I'm talking about this, work on this personally. Like Robert Bruce actually uses this as a healing technique, working with other people. So he'll go into meditation, and then as he's meditating with other people, he'll start visualizing these tools. Once he's connected to the sort of astral aspect of it, he'll use these tools to actually cleanse other people's chakras and their energy bodies or whatever, right? And again, this is the Shakti aspect of this. Now, yeah. So the third part of the title of this, what do I call this? I call this ASMR Sam Smith and the Seduction of Annihilation. Now, part of this is the idea of seduction because, hey kitty, because by nature, sensory objects are inherently seductive, right? Right? Domino's Pizza knows this. They know, like, the objects they sell are inherently seductive. People fall for that stupid advertising, can't resist it, right? Lots of seduction. But what happens is when you are on the astral, what happens is we are seduced by, not by pizza, not by beer, not by sex. What we're seduced by are specific qualities of consciousness, and also the qualities of consciousness which are like this is something they talk about in Tantra. I don't remember. Not got the best memory in the world, but there's a specific type of quality consciousness have. One of the qualities consciousness have is to hide itself and reveal itself. And so what people are playing with oftentimes with consciousness is the hidden and the revelation. And that sense of hiding and revealing is intoxicating. Now, what people think they're dealing with is they think they're dealing with, like, oh, I'm addicted to pizza or whatever it is. But what they're actually playing with is this sort of on-off switch with consciousness. It's the revelation and obfuscation of consciousness. And what happens is that quality of consciousness is sort of hidden inside of different sensory qualities, right? So in the smell world, you'll find those qualities. In the taste world, you'll find those qualities, right? All of these senses have this possibility, right? So I'm watching some guy on YouTube the other day. He's called The Anti-Chef, and the Anti-Chef's really funny because he's trying to learn how to do French cooking by using the Julia Child's cookbooks. It's quite an amusing channel, and but he'll often like cook something and he'll eat it, and he's like, oh wait, there's a flavor coming through, and so there's like a hidden element which comes through. This happens with scents a lot too, and there's a playfulness which skillful creators can create. Like if you're looking at some artwork, sometimes you're like, oh, it's very colorful. Oh, wait a minute, there's something in there, like those Escher paintings. Like, oh, it's an old lady. No, it's a young woman, right? It's like there's a hiding of meaning. Meaning is hidden inside of conscious structures. And so essentially what I'm saying is the basic conscious structures which are discussed, I believe, in the Recognition Sutras, amongst other tantric materials, they discuss these core qualities of consciousness. And so that's what people are completely enamored by. It doesn't matter if you're talking about food or attraction or anything. It's this infinite dance of the obfuscation and revelation of consciousness. And this is on the Shakti side of the consciousness. Now, what's going on here is on the physical level, most people don't have awareness of what's actually happening, right? We just think, hey, I really like this stuff, right? Oh, I'm like addicted to your love, or I'm addicted to wine, or whatever it might be. Attention, lies, murder. It's the same quality. And so, where am I going with this? Let me take a drink. I'm a little bit thirsty here. So, the apprehension of consciousness. So in the physical world, people aren't aware of this, but as you become aware of the astrality, as you become aware of the imagination and how it can become made real, how it can become made real through conscious apprehension of it. So like the more you become aware of this vibrational feel. So I think ASMR is actually a pretty good training place for this. If you can actually just do ASMR and actually feel the vibe, that's a good place to think, oh, wait a minute, that's what we're talking about. That's what energy is, just that feeling. Now, what happens is if you turn off the videos and just try and maintain that feeling, that's energy, right? And so the more you focus on that, the more you contemplate it, it starts opening up the reality of the astral world to you, right? And that will start unfolding. It will start opening like a flower, if you will, so that you can, because it's veiled. It's veiled by consciousness itself, right? And the unveiling of it is the revelation of it. The only way you can unveil it is to focus on it, because it doesn't want to be revealed, right? It doesn't mind being revealed, but it's like you've got to actually perceive. It only opens to perception, right? It only opens to consciousness. And so if you choose to be unconscious, you want to see it, and you can enjoy the physical world. But if you choose to perambulate your awareness around the sensory feeling, or the feeling created by these sensory objects, and contemplate its significance, even after the sensory objects have gone, that feeling will often open up, and you'll find that the object is actually not physical. It's actually an object in consciousness, right? And so that object in consciousness exists even if you're not looking at the object. And so this becomes a real opening into meditation, because you can focus your meditation on imaginary objects. And what's interesting with those imaginary objects is because they're not limited by the physical plane, they have infinite potential. Because there's no friction, or I'm hesitating to say time and space here, but there's limitations. The senses of time and space are different. I think somebody like Rupert Spira has he's got this down pretty well about, well, I'm not sure Spira knows much about the astral plane. Maybe I'm gonna take that back. He's pretty switched on, that guy, but he's got a whole understanding of how time and space work with consciousness, which I can't articulate off the top of my head. But there's certainly a different feel of time and space in this astrality. And one of the things that happens as you're working with this is there's this wonderful, good feeling, right? So if you're calming energy, that can feel wonderful, right? if you're sponging energy, and a sponge sort of implies water, right? Because you're sponging something. What are you sponging? I seem to be having connection difficulties at the moment. Hopefully this continues. Uh, so this quality of infinite awareness of these astral objects, what you discover too is, for example, on the physical plane, if you grab like a flower, it's just a flower. But if you got a microscope and look at it, oh wow, you can zoom in, right? And you can see things, and you zoom in, it gets, oh wow, there's more there. Let's zoom in 1,000-fold. Wow, there's still stuff there. 1,000,000-fold. There's, wow, we're in quarks or whatever, right? So in the astral plane, that kind of stuff happens too. But you're no longer dealing with like scientific objects, right? What you're dealing with is you're dealing with structures of consciousness, and those have their own significances, right? And often, I mean, there's a lot of projection in this area too. So a lot of times, like your feelings about an object will have, you're actually projecting meaning still. So in the same way as we project into the real world, like, oh, I love you, is a projection from you, right? But in the astral world too, like there's different things you'll look at which have different effects, right? So if you're looking at a flower, you might not connect viscerally or emotionally with a flower. I don't understand what that means, right? Whereas you might connect with the sensual aspect of the sponge moving up and down your arm, right? And that might feel really good. If you were working in that area, it might be really easy to start feeling like, oh, wow, that feels really good. Like, it feels too good. It might start feeling sexy, right? And that's fine. It's fine. In any circumstances, that's fine. And you can focus on that and say, okay, this is like the astral aspect of sensuality, and you can focus on that. And like the more you work on it, the more you contemplate it, that you'll drill down deeper into that and what that means, right? Like an electron microscope, your conscious focus will push you deeper into the structure and deeper. Now, what can happen is based on your projective structures and your own trauma imprints and karmic imprints is sometimes those projections which you're projecting into this astral substance can evoke other energies. So, for example, if you're feeling really sensual as you move the sponge up and down your arm, you might start feeling sexy about that. And if you feel sexy, depending on what your personality type is, you might feel guilty about that. Oh man, I shouldn't do that, right? But it feels good, right? So you might do it anyway. No, I shouldn't do it. And there's like a conflict, right? But the problem is you're in this sort of infinite astral plane, right? There's no boundaries here, right? This extends out. Where does it extend to? What is the limit of consciousness? How are the limits of consciousness defined? Well, that's probably a big question. But one thing that is for sure is that simple projections like guilt and feeling like, oh, I shouldn't do that, versus, oh, wow, this is a really loving feeling. This is a loving feeling. In the real world, those have distinct vibes, right? If somebody's got a sort of guilty vibe about sensuality, they come off as like kind of weird, right? Like, get away from me, you weirdo. If somebody's got a sort of loving vibe about it, it's like, oh, it's really nice, it's great to be around this positive energy, right? Now, if you bring this into the astral plane, that extrapolates out times infinity, right? And this has got the possibility of evoking certain energies. So if you have a loving kindness way of thinking about this, you could evoke divinity. If you've got a negative self-loathing type of thought about this, you could evoke a demon. And these are imaginary objects, people. It's all good. They're just imaginary. It's just the imagination. The thing is it just the imagination? The problem is we're dealing with conscious structures which have been hidden from human awareness. And so what happens is as we allow our consciousness, I love this word, perambulate, as we allow our consciousness to perambulate around the perimeter of this visual structure, an imaginary object, it might start revealing itself or not. Depends how you feel or how your energy is, right? But sometimes it starts revealing itself and you start moving into the imaginary plane, and it's like, oh, it's the astral plane. You're like moving in there, and you can complete apprehension, and it's almost like it's like seeing the blueprints to reality, but they're not two-dimensional. They're three-dimensional, high-definition, plastic, hyper-real, but these are hidden. So what usually happens is when we discover new sensual objects of any kind, a new beer, we just accept it for what it is. Hello. We accept this for what it is, and we don't perceive more deeply into what's happening. But whether we perceive the astral, I was going to say the astral output, whether we perceive the astral output or not, the astral output is there. And I would almost say that the astral is there before the physical, sometimes. So sometimes the astral is there, and then we behave because of the preponderance of astral material, right? That's generally what's considered like an egregor, right? It's like the spiritual entity, whether it's an entity or just a force, which is so deep or so abundant that it causes physical outputs through us. And this brings us to the seduction of annihilation. Because consciousness is implicitly seductive. That's what it does. It seduces us. And we often unwittingly are playing with the aspects of consciousness. Whether you're flapping your eyelids at a prospective lover, or doing a sneaky glance, right? You get a glance and you get like a boom, you get a connection. Or whether you're sneaking whiskey when nobody's looking, or whatever it is. There's all these little it's this playfulness with awareness. It's the awareness of us, the unawareness of other people. But this has all got like its corollary in this plastic, infinite dimension of the astral plane. And all of this is an aspect of Shakti, interpolated by the spaciousness of Shiva, but nobody's even aware of Shakti. Forget about Shiva, right? So, I'll just tell you, man. I'm like binge watching right now. I got this series I've been watching. It's like it's one of those exercise challenge series. It's amazing, really good. And somehow I stumbled going on YouTube onto that Grammy performance by Sam Smith, which is essentially it's like a hyper sensual, and certainly characterized as demonic and satanic. I mean, that's what it is, right? I'm not even saying that's what it's, I'm not even trying to, I'm just describing this. I'm not trying to characterize it. I'm just describing what the presentation is, right? And also what's interesting about it is it was such a surprising video, you know, and then I watched an interview with him afterwards, and he's very flirty with this concept. The concept of sensuality. It's so intoxicating, right? He's been intoxicated by the astrality. Not just him. The whole of the culture has been intoxicated by the astrality of sensuality. right? It's this egregor which is seducing people who are not aware of consciousness and its ability to seduce. In some ways, I don't know, I don't remember what the fairy tale was, but there's a fairy tale, was it Snow White with the rose and the thorn, right? The rose, beautiful, attractive, but there's a thorn in it. Ding, right? That's what's going on. The thorn is the seduction of annihilation. Unawareness and unconsciousness. The sensuality of the object without apprehension of its inherent non-existence. The worship of objectification. That's probably according to many scriptures, that's the highest error, the worship of objectification. Not even the worship of objects, the worship of objectification, right? The act, because there's so many objects, right? So it's like anything, just more stuff, right? Right, and in that video, there's all these like demonic figures sticking their tongues out and in lustful misapprehension of consciousness. Now, nothing wrong with sticking your tongue out. Kelly does that as she destroys the world, right? These conscious structures and the physical structures deserve to be explored and contemplated. You know, I mean, there's no problems doing these things, right? And who am I to judge? I've certainly indulged in plenty of crazy shit in my life, right? But one of the things that happens is there's the in the perambulation of consciousness. Well, the worship of objectification is completely distinct from the perambulation of consciousness. So if you were allowing consciousness to perambulate, you might act like those people, but then you would pull back and say, wait a minute, right? Like what is actually going on here, right? What is going on? Like the fantasy aspect of Sam Smith as the devil contrasted with this fat guy in latex. Ugh. Right? They're just like, dude, what are you fucking thinking, motherfucker? You know? Stop that. Right? That's the perambulation of consciousness. It's moving out of the imaginary into and allowing the pullback into the real. It's moving back and forth. Pendulating between the different forms of what the reality are. So what's happening there is those people are focused on the imaginary aspect without regard to what the physical reality is. And the physical reality is the sort of natural unfoldment of divinity, I guess. There's a lot of emergent topics which come up from this. I'm not going to try and hit them all, A lot of them are coming to my mind right now. Like other imaginary things are like all the imaginary genders, completely imaginary, but have infinite validity on the astral plane, but nobody's perambulating back to the physical plane to look at how the world is actually structured. And getting perspective on like how consciousness actually works. This is the big problem in the world, is there's no awareness of consciousness. There's no awareness of what consciousness actually means. And there's nobody teaching how to work with consciousness. So what happens anyway, to finish off, is as these people seduce themselves, they're not seducing themselves. What they're doing is they're seduced. They think they're being playful and edgy, but they're actually evoking the infinite powers of certain types of conscious material, which they don't understand. They are, I'm not saying I understand it either, but they're certainly playing with satanic and demonic archetypes. And on the physical plane, that might seem like edgy and fun, but on the astral plane, that shit gets real dangerous very quickly. And it's literally an evocation. So in the same way that Robert Bruce might imagine a spray bottle of water to spray a loving, warm, cleansing liquid on your chakras to cleanse this stuff, these people are evoking something of a remarkably different character, right? It's a remarkably different character coming out of this, of their imaginations, which is entirely, it's entirely unconscious. They have no idea what they're playing with. I mean, maybe this is where Jesus comes in and like they forgive them for they don't know what they've done. They have no idea what they are fucking with, right? So all these edgy people filling their faces with Botox and getting double mastectomies and cutting off whatever, and then imagining that, oh man, like Satan and the devil and evil, these are just some of the faces of Shakti. And as much as this world is real, those things are completely achievable, even though they might not be ultimately true. But you got to admit that the mindless focus on lust as a worldview, it doesn't seem wise. It doesn't seem wise. It doesn't seem like a wise thing to do, you know? And it's being so widely promoted at the same time as so many other parts of the world are disintegrating. I'm done, you guys. So that's it for today. I think that thing with the creation of tools, the astral tools, really, really interesting. Lots of ways to work with that. And if you were to do that, what I recommend in that kind of thing is if you're building like astral energy tools, what you do is as you're building the tools, move back and forth between that and observation of the observer. So you're playing with Shakti and Shiva at the same time. It's really powerful. And it's like an infinite meditation, which perambulates through all kinds of things and through the different categories, not only of sensory, but also of emotional transformation. So, for example, lust is a useful conscious space. It's very useful. It's obviously one of the most potent aspects of creation itself. And unbalanced of annihilation. Peace out.